Hello, my beauties and beasties out there. Welcome to Beauties and Beasts, a podcast of all things Beauty and the Beast. I'm DF, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the cry of Tarzan, the man who was raised by apes, essentially the American version of Mowgli from the Jungle Book. Even if you've never read the books by Edgar Rice Burroughs, you've probably seen Tarzan in pop culture with the various film and TV adaptations, most well known to us millennials being the 1999 Disney version, or maybe you've seen some Tarzan-inspired characters like George of the Jungle or Gunta from the Danganronpa video games. You get it. Tarzan is considered one of the most influential heroes of modern American literature. Honestly, this guy's been reiterated so many times, I could do a whole separate podcast on him. But today, I'm mostly focusing on the Disney movie and briefly upon the book. Actually, probably not briefly. But if you ask me, Disney made Tarzan way better than Edgar Rice Burroughs did. If anything, they fixed everything wrong with it. That said, here's an obligatory warning you didn't think you'd get when discussing a Disney film. This episode contains mentions of graphic violence, cannibalism, racism. Yeah, I said it, racism. In this case, Disney's not the guilty party, for once. First, I'd like to thank my $5 plus patrons, Arvin Joshua Rocks 15, BellaPinkSavage, Cosmic Trail, nalaxsimba, and TyrannosaurusVenom for their continuing support, and I hope it continues for when the podcast ends and I move my crowdfunding onto Patreon. Also, you can show your support by checking out my merchandise on Redbubble. It's Pride Month, so find your flag on my page and show off your pride. I've just added 5 more flags literally minutes before I started this live stream. Go check them out. Just go to disneyfanatic23.redbubble.com. That's disneyfanatic23.redbubble.com. This podcast is now available to stream on iHeartRadio and Spotify, and of course, YouTube, so you can listen on whatever platform you prefer. Sorry, did I say stream? Listen to. Alright, so, the first Tarzan book, Tarzan of the Apes, was published in 1912 by American author Edgar Rice Burroughs. Yep, over 100 years ago. I'm not going to sum up all the books, because there are 24 of them? Sheesh, this guy had a lot of time on his hands. What you see in the Disney movie mostly comes from the first book, with the TV series The Legend of Tarzan taking elements of later books or stuff from the first that didn't make it into the movie. But because this is a podcast of Beauty and the Beast type relationships, our focus will mainly be on Tarzan and Jane Porter. So, Tarzan of the Apes begins with the Lord Greystoke, John Clayton, and his young pregnant wife, Alice, being marooned on the African coast by black mutineers. Oh, yeah, have I mentioned, as expected of any early 20th century American novel, there's a lot of racism in here? At least this book acknowledges the blacks were mistreated by the captain, and that's why they rebelled. In fact, it was because Lord Greystoke saved the head of the mutineers that he and his wife were allowed to live, but, still marooned. With nothing else to do but wait, Lord Greystoke builds a cabin for him and his wife. She gives birth to a son, and shortly after she dies, followed by her husband. Meanwhile, in the jungle, the alpha ape, Kerchak, is going on a rampage for no apparent reason other than he's just mad because he's an ape. Yeah. And in order to escape his wrath, the female ape, Kala, loses her grip on her infant as she's climbing a tree, and it falls to its death. When the tribe goes to investigate the cabin with the white apes, they find them dead, and Kala finds the living baby in the cradle, and trades it with the corpse of her dead baby before temperamental Kerchak can see what she's done. Let me point out, contrary to the movie, Kala is not Kerchak's mate, but Tublat's mate, who, by the way, was Tarzan's greatest enemy in the Disney TV series. Why can't we have that series on Disney Plus? It was really great. Come on, Disney. So, Tarzan grows up with the apes, thinking all the time Kala's his biological mother and his father was a white ape. And that's why his foster father, Tublat, hates him. To make up for his small size, he finds more resourceful ways of hunting. He finds the cabin one day with the skeletons of his parents and the skeleton of the baby ape, not realizing it's an ape. Sees books with pictures of creatures like himself, and over time he teaches himself to read and write English, which I call BS on. At least in the Disney movie he had formal instruction from Jane. He gets into a lot of battles with various animals, ends up killing Tublat, then Kerchak, and takes over as Alpha. His mother Kala gets murdered by a savage black cannibal, and Tarzan takes revenge and hunts him down, and finds the African village, and though they look sort of like Tarzan, he finds himself resenting them, seeing them as wicked with their savage ways. I know this is a book of its time, but damn, was it hard for me, a reader 100 years later, to stomach passages like this. Tarzan doesn't see humans of his own race until he's in his 20s. By this time, he has left the gorilla tribe, saying that, it's time I go on my own and figure out if there are other creatures like me. When a group of American and English explorers are marooned on the same beach as his parents' cabin by black mutineers. Yes, because it's always the angry, violent, wicked, cunning black people who cause trouble on the ships. Did no one ever stop to wonder why they were so angry? Maybe because they were brought over from Africa forcefully on ships and were mistreated for centuries? Among the group is the intellectual but bumbling Professor Archimedes Q. Porter, his friend Samuel T. Philander, who's always pulling him out of trouble because the professor's too oblivious to know when he's going to be attacked by a lion, the professor's daughter Jane, her black maid Esmeralda, who does nothing but scream and faint, and is utterly useless and so emotional. Book of its time, book of its time. And finally, William Cecil Clayton, aka the current Lord Greystoke, aka Tarzan's long-lost cousin, though neither of them are aware of it yet. Tarzan writes them a note allowing the marooned party to stay in the cabin, signing it Tarzan of the Apes, and proceeds to save them from various jungle beasts and bring them food. Although, because Tarzan can't speak English, they don't believe him to be Tarzan of the Apes when he appears as Tarzan of the Apes is supposed to know English. And in all this time, Tarzan falls in love with Jane Porter, a sweet girl from Baltimore. Yeah, she's American in this. Literally the first white girl he sees, go figure. And in stalker fashion, sends her a love note saying he'd hunt for her and protect her. But Jane is also being pursued by Cecil Clayton, who is actually not that bad a guy. Disney did this character dirty. However, Jane soon encounters a great ape named Turquoise, Tarzan's old rival, whom he got kicked out of the tribe when he tried to fight to be leader. Turquoise. That's a long name. Maybe call him Turk for short? Oh, wait a minute. Is this where they got the name? Very different character than in the movie. Turquoise, seeing Jane, concludes she must be Tarzan's mate, and so kidnaps her to start his own ape tribe. Okay, what is with these stories of male apes carrying off female humans? Has that actually happened in real life? Actually, if you've listened to my analysis on King Kong several episodes back, you'll find this trope is primarily stemmed from racism. I mean, think about it. A dark, ape-like being carrying off a poor, defenseless, white woman. If you haven't figured it out, go listen to my episode on King Kong. Tarzan goes to rescue her, while a French Navy ship discovers the explorers, and the French officers, hearing that Jane's been kidnapped, lend their aid in rescuing her and go off into the jungle. While those people are being attacked by cannibals, Tarzan defeats Turquoise in battle, grabs Jane, and kisses her smack on the lips. Whoa, consent, buddy. Thankfully, Jane agrees with me and shoves him off. Like, no thank you. And Tarzan is confused, but quickly realizes the laws of the jungle probably aren't the same as the laws of humanity, and being forceful in his affections isn't the way to win his mate. Hey, for a guy literally raised by apes, give him credit for being a fast learner and backing off when she said no. There are plenty of so-called civilized men who never learn that lesson. Because it's night, Tarzan takes Jane to a clearing, makes a temporary hut for her to sleep in. He brings her food in the morning, and Jane starts seeing him as a handsome forest god. I'm already gonna say it, Disney did this romance better. But of course, with how uncivilized Tarzan is, Jane wonders how it would look introducing him to her friends when he can't even eat properly. By the time Tarzan returns Jane to the cabin, everyone else is out looking for her, so Tarzan goes to bring them back. But the French soldiers return, having lost some of their comrades, and their lieutenant, D'Arnaud, was taken by the cannibals. Jane insists that they wait, as her forest god might be saving their lieutenant right now. Cecil Clayton, seeing how dreamily Jane is acting when talking about the forest god, grows jealous and suggests perhaps the jungle man is one of the cannibals, as he carried their weapons and their jewelry. Note that he stole them. But Jane refuses to believe it. This is probably like the only character flaw we see from Clayton. You know, while he's generally a gentleman and nice guy, he does kind of grow jealous of Tarzan, but he does acknowledge it later, like, yeah, that wasn't my best moment. Meanwhile, Tarzan rescues D'Arnaud from the cannibals, but the lieutenant is ill, and Tarzan takes him to the small hut he made for Jane and nurses him back to health. Upon learning that Tarzan can read and write English, but knows no spoken human language, D'Arnaud teaches him to speak French while he's recovering. Although he quickly realizes his mistake, as now Tarzan attributes English written words to their French counterparts. For example, T-R-E-E is pronounced arbre. Yeah, not the best way to go. Once D'Arnaud is healthy again, Tarzan takes him back to the cabin, only to find everyone is gone. And a note from Jane saying she got them to wait for days, and that she cannot love Tarzan of the Apes as she does not know him, and her heart belongs to another, talking about a forest god. And she asks Tarzan of the Apes to tell the forest god who saved her farewell. Remember, she doesn't get that Tarzan in the notes and the man who saved her are the same person. But if he should ever be in Baltimore, to look her up. So Tarzan asks D'Arnaud to take him to Baltimore. As D'Arnaud is grateful to Tarzan for saving his life, it's the least that he can do. As they journey back, Tarzan shows D'Arnaud his father's journal. D'Arnaud reads it, as it's in French, and concludes that Tarzan is the true Lord Greystoke, the baby described in the journal. But Tarzan's like, my mother was an ape, and that baby is probably the small skeleton that was in the crib. Of course, D'Arnaud knows how genetics work, and he intends to prove that Tarzan is the heir to the Clayton estate and not Cecil. Can I just say the bromance between Tarzan and D'Arnaud is more endearing than the romance between Tarzan and Jane, at least in the book? This D'Arnaud is super patient and does everything he can to help Tarzan find his place in human society, and teaches him its rules, and is so understanding when Tarzan gets it wrong. Real shame this stand-up bro didn't make it into the movie. He's like the best character in this book. Also worth noting that D'Arnaud calls Tarzan out on his racism, that not all people with dark skin are like the cannibals he's encountered, and he shouldn't judge on appearances. I'll give the book this much credit. They make it to France, thanks to the help of a French outpost, and D'Arnaud submits the baby fingerprints from the journal and Tarzan's prints to the police to see if they match. But Tarzan can't wait on the results and wants to see Jane, and takes the boat to Baltimore. But he just misses her again, as Jane's gone to the Midwest and is almost forced to marry a mean rich guy by Robert Candler in order to stop her father from going bankrupt. When a fire breaks out at the farmhouse, Tarzan arrives just in time, in a car, mind you. When did he have the time to get a license? To save everyone. He explains everything to Jane in French and gives them the treasure that the mutineers stole from them back in Africa, and tells Robert Candler to back off. But the thing is, Tarzan doesn't belong in Jane's world, so she tells him, I like you, but, we're just not gonna work out. And she chooses to marry Cecil Clayton. Just as Tarzan receives a telegram from D'Arnaud that the fingerprints confirm Tarzan is a true Lord Greystoke, and he confirms with the people who had buried the skeletons back in Africa. So what about the small skeleton? What was it? Oh, we figured out it was a skeleton of an ape. So, yeah, mystery solved. He can easily claim that Clayton's not the true heir, but he is. And he would have the means to marry Jane, but he chooses not to, as it wouldn't be honorable. And he doesn't want to make Jane feel obliged to marry him. Oh, but don't worry, he wins her back in the next book. They have a son. The son has his own adventures, and we got 23 more sequels, which would take all day to go through, so let's just stop the summary here. So, my opinion on the book version of Tarzan. Lots of emphasis on the action and violence, and oh my gosh, the racist remarks. It was kind of painful to read, or rather listen to. I was listening to the audiobook. I have not read them all, but reading the synopses, the adventures of Tarzan get less realistic down the line and more akin to supernatural or science fiction. I mean, this was pulp fiction. They kind of sensationalize a lot of things, especially when he encounters an underground world where dinosaurs have survived, later inspiring works such as Ice Age 3. Many of these adventures were adapted into the Disney TV series The Legend of Tarzan. But hey, we still need to analyze Disney's Tarzan, in case you haven't seen it. Spoiler alert, by the way. In the 1999 Disney animated film, Tarzan's parents escape from a burning ship and wash up on the shore of the African jungle. Oh yeah, and Tarzan's already born at this point, and together, not just the dad, the parents build a home in the treetops. That's a marriage right there, working together to make sure you survive, and with a baby on your back. Sadly, the parents are killed one night by Sabor the leopard. By the way, Sabor in the books is a lioness and is kind of just a minor foe, not the one who killed his parents. But I guess Burroughs didn't realize that there were no lions in the jungle, so Disney corrected that mistake. It was still the early 20th century, we didn't know everything about jungle animals yet. Sabor also kills the baby of the gorilla leader Kerchak and his mate Kala. Here, Kerchak isn't a rampaging beast. Actually, contrary to the book, none of these gorillas are violent unless attacked. Disney gives more, for lack of a better term, humanity to the animal characters rather than painting them as having one-track savage minds. Well, this was after Jane Goodall's research into apes being social creatures, research that wasn't available in 1912, so, I'll kind of give Burroughs a pass here. A heartbroken Kala hears a baby cry in the distance and follows it to the treehouse, finds the bodies of the parents and the surviving human baby, and the hungry Sabor. Kala whisks the baby away and decides to be his mother, but Kerchak is like, it won't replace the one we lost, and it's not her kind. Take him back before you put this family in danger. But upon confirmation that there are no others of his kind, Kerchak lets Kala keep him, but doesn't acknowledge him as his son. Okay, if you hear any scratching in the background, that's my cat. Hang on. Shoo, shoo, shoo. Speaking of animals, Kala names the baby Tarzan, which I forgot to mention means white skin. The movie leaves this out. He grows, has trouble fitting in, and gets into a lot of trouble. And one of the most moving scenes is when, as a kid, he tries to make himself more ape-like by covering himself in mud. Though Kala, washing him off, shows that they both have eyes, a nose, ears, and hands, yet still vastly different, as he notices. However, when she makes him feel his heart and then her heart, she says that they are exactly the same. Kerchak just doesn't see that. Tarzan insists that he'll make him see and be the best ape ever. So, like in the book, he tries to compensate for his lack of apeness. Except this time he has friends like Tantor the elephant, who's only briefly mentioned in the book, and Tarzan's gorilla cousin, Turkina, or Turk for short. Seriously, they took a name from Turkaz, and the similarities between the characters pretty much ends here. Although, given the difference in human and animal lifespans, it's a marvel how they all age at the same rate. At least the books acknowledge that Tarzan was not growing as fast as his ape brothers and sisters. Tarzan makes his own spear and learns moves from other animals like swinging on vines or surfing vines. And he grows into a big, strong man with 0 hair on his body. Come on, at least the book explains he shaves himself with a stone blade he made, based on the pictures of the men he finds in his parents' books who are clean-shaven. Even us females get hair all over our bodies unless we choose to shave them. Sabor attacks the gorilla family one day, and Tarzan defeats her with a spear, presenting the body to Kerchak in hopes for his approval. But then a gunshot rings throughout the jungle, and Tarzan follows it to a group of humans, reduced to Cecil Clayton, much older now and more trigger-happy, Professor Archimedes Q. Porter, still goofy, but with more common sense. At least he knows to run away from a lion when he sees it, or leopard, because there are no lions here. And his daughter Jane, who's now English and more intellectual, working with her father on his study of gorillas as a research partner rather than the lady who's just along for the ride. Clayton shares Burroughs' sentiments that gorillas are savage beasts, while Jane and her father theorize that they're social creatures. Hey, Jane Goodall before Jane Goodall. Wait a minute, Jane Porter, Jane Goodall? I sense a conspiracy theory here. Jane gets separated from the men when she sketches a baby baboon. The baboon steals her drawing, and when she snatches it back, the baboon cries and his family chases after her in anger. She's rescued by Tarzan and at first is frightened, especially when he gets a little too close for comfort, touching her toes and her cheek and all. Give the guy a break. He's never seen another human before. At least he didn't forcefully kiss her like in the book. He sees her hand, touches it, and finds that they are the same, and then listens to her heartbeat and has her listen to his. This is all innocent given context, but she's like, what the hey? He mimics her speech like he does with all the other animal sounds, and they learn each other's names. Jane gets Tarzan to take her back to her camp, finding Tarzan's friends trashing the place, and she sees that he is one of the gorillas. And then Kerchak shows up, frightening Jane, and Kala urges Tarzan to come with her. Clayton and the professor find Jane at the trash camp, and she tells them about how she was saved by Tarzan, the ape man. Meanwhile, Kerchak forbids the gorillas from going near the humans, and Tarzan insists that they mean them no harm. Why are you threatened by anyone different from you? Kala pleads for him to listen to Kerchak, but he responds with, why didn't you tell me there were creatures like me? Ouch. He runs back to the camp, proving to Clayton he's real and not a girlish fantasy from Jane. Clayton asks where the gorillas are, but Tarzan does not understand English. So Jane shows him all the wonders of the human world, teaches him to read and speak English. He shows her the animals in the jungle and how to swing on vines, and in turn they grow closer together. However, Tarzan still won't take them to the gorillas because of Kerchak. I mean, he's not as much of a savage as he is in the books, but he still gets pretty angry and territorial. But the crew's boat arrives to take them back to England, and Jane asks Tarzan to come along, but he might never come back. Jane insists that he belongs with people, but Tarzan asks her to stay instead, and she says she can't. Then Clayton pulls Tarzan aside, saying Jane came all this way to see the gorillas and is so disappointed. But if she sees them, she might have a reason to stay. So Tarzan asks Turk and Tantor to distract Kerchak with human disguises, surprise that works, while Tarzan shows the humans the gorillas. Jane and the professor are excited, and Tarzan teaches Jane to speak gorilla, getting her to say, Jane stays with Tarzan. But she's like, I thought we talked about this. Then Kerchak comes back, sees the humans, and attacks. Tarzan holds him back to let the friends get away, and to his shock, almost chokes him. And Kerchak says, I asked you to protect the family, and you betrayed us all. Kala then takes Tarzan to the treehouse where she found him, and he finds a photograph of him and his parents. Now you know, his mother says. Tarzan, whatever you choose, I just want you to be happy. She leaves him to think about it, and eventually Tarzan reemerges from the treehouse and in his father's clothes, deciding to live as a human. You really gotta commend this movie for its visual storytelling. There are just some bits where it doesn't even need to be dialogue. You could feel and understand what's going on just by watching it. It's so beautiful. It's cinematic genius. Tarzan hugs Kala, saying, no matter where I go, you'll always be my mother, and you will always be in my heart. Damn, why couldn't the book have had emotional scenes like this? What was wrong with you, Burroughs? Didn't you have a heart? Tarzan joins Jane on the ship, but the crew mutinies, and they're led by Clayton. Plot twist, they're poachers here to capture the gorillas. Tarzan, Jane, and the professor and the captain are imprisoned below deck, but Tantor hears Tarzan's cry for help. Turk doesn't care, as she's bummed that Tarzan chose the humans over them, but Tantor gives her a strong talking to and drags her along to rescue Tarzan. Meanwhile, Clayton and his gang are putting the gorillas in cages, but Tarzan swoops in with backup from his human friends and the other jungle animals. Kerchak is surprised Tarzan came back, and Tarzan says, I came home. The battle rages on, and Jane proves to have some capability herself, and Kerchak is shot by Clayton. Uh-oh. Tarzan goes after Clayton, is shot in the arm, but then he's cornered by Clayton. Then he corners Clayton in the trees, holding him at gunpoint, and Clayton laughs, going, go on, shoot me. Be a man. But Tarzan destroys the gun, saying, I'm not a man like you. Clayton, not caring his life was just spared, chases Tarzan through the trees, but gets caught in the vines. He slashes through them, not realizing he's got a vine around his neck. And once the others are cut, he falls, and the vine serves as his noose. No doubt, one of the darkest Disney villain deaths there's ever been. Tarzan goes to Kerchak and asks him to forgive him. No, he says, forgive me for not understanding that you were always one of us. The family must look to you now, my son. Once Kerchak draws his final breath, Tarzan takes over as leader of the family. Damn it, Burroughs! Why couldn't you write powerful emotional scenes like this? We don't need battles all the time. We need feels. So now Tarzan is going to stay in the jungle and lead the family. And Jane bids him goodbye. But as she and her dad are being rowed to the ship, her father thinks that she should stay. And Jane insists that she belongs with him in England. And he goes, but you love him. Go on. Is it just me, or is the professor one of the best Disney dads? Sure, he's goofy, but as my own dad would say, he's a dad, it's his job. So Jane jumps into the water and into Tarzan's arms, and she kisses him hard. Thrilled at the new sensation, he kisses her back, gently and sweetly. See, Burroughs, that's how a first kiss should go. So, Jane joins Tarzan in the jungle, and so does the professor, because why not? The jungle's fun, and they live happily ever after. Their married life is continued in the TV series, showing how they find a middle ground in each other's worlds, having some civility living in the treehouse, but Jane not pushing Tarzan into being something he's not, and also having fun swinging through the trees. Of course, they have a few hiccups, like when Jane's friends from England visit and find Tarzan to be unsuitable, Of course, it helps that he is very brave and muscular, and so they get the picture. Or when her childhood friend Robert Candler, yes, the same Robert Candler, arrives and Tarzan grows jealous, or when they run into Queen La of the Leopard Men, who tries to make Tarzan her mate. And, his relationship with Jane is tested because La is a lot more like Tarzan, raised by leopards. But Jane is the best. He loves Jane. He's loyal to her. It's very rare Disney chooses to explore the challenges couples go through once they are married. Mostly they have a couple and then they get married and they never show what happens afterwards. I mean, they will have them have kids, but they will not focus on their continuing married relationship. Marriage has all sorts of problems, even when you don't have kids. But what makes Tarzan and Jane a strong couple in the Disney version is that despite their differences and the complications, they work through their problems together. In contrast, Tarzan in the books goes through great lengths to integrate himself into civilized human society, and it's not until he is declared an English lord that he's able to marry Jane. And after all their terrifying adventures, Jane tries to leave Tarzan's jungle past behind to protect her son. Okay, I didn't read all the books, I admit, but it sounds like Tarzan had to change everything about himself just for this woman and just completely forget where he came from. Not just in appearance, he had to change entirely and even deny his upbringing. Not the healthiest foundation for a relationship. True, Tarzan does go through some changes in the movie, learning language and some social etiquette, but part of it is from a yearning to know where he came from. And hey, there's nothing wrong with learning another language, especially if it's a language of your intended partner. In fact, that's appreciated if you try to learn their language and part of their culture. And it is his own culture, genetically. After all, he was adopted by essentially a different race, and most adopted kids go through an identity crisis in seeking their biological origins. However, in the end, Jane comes to accept Tarzan as he is, not forcing him to come to England with her, but embraces her wild side and stays with him in the jungle. So yeah, they both change, but in positive ways, and they still keep their original personalities, just Tarzan is more knowledgeable, and Jane is free to cut herself loose. And as exhibited in the TV series, she likes her new self. And hey, she's an improvement over the helpless young girl whose main characteristic is that she's pretty. Your stereotypical damsel in distress. I know it was 1912, but So yeah, I think you know which version I prefer. Disney actually describes the difference between the book and the movie best in their own TV series in the finale when things get all meta and Edgar Rice Burroughs interviews people about Tarzan, and when he finally meets him, is excited by all the creatures he's fought. And Jane's like, you seem mainly focused on Tarzan's fighting. You think that's exciting, but what I see in Tarzan is someone kind and gentle. I see him as a person. That's the thing. While the books have a lot of action, and nothing wrong with some action, and a lot more compared to the Disney movie, it lacks in heart. I think Disney brings more emotional maturity to the characters, not just the animals. And while Tarzan still fights, it's not for glory or sport or due to anger issues or just because it's exciting. It's to defend the people and creatures he cares about. And it expands his relationships with the animals more. The animals have feelings too. And treating his relationship with his mother Kala the way a lot of kids and adoptive parents are. And also the complex relationship between him and Kerchak, always trying to get his approval as the only father figure he has. And Kerchak struggling to accept this person who's not biologically his son, but he's still in his life. And it's until the end when Tarzan proves his loyalty and how he will always fight for the family that Kerchak sees the error of his ways. Tarzan had never been the problem, it had always been himself. Which makes you really sad when he passes away. Contrary to in the book where, okay, it was just a rampaging gorilla. I'm glad he's dead. Now, the idea of Tarzan stems from the evolutionary debate of nature versus nurture. Not only have there been actual instances of abandoned human babies being raised by animals, oddly enough, mostly girls. We need a story about that. But kids are adopted all the time by other people, sometimes by parents of a different race. Studies have shown that while adopted kids will inherit some behaviors from their biological parents, how they approach those behaviors will depend on the parenting of their adoptive parents. There's still debate on whether nature or nurture has a greater effect on a person's development. In reality, it's a mix of both. But Burroughs and Disney seem to have different views on the matter. In the case of Tarzan, he grew up with no interaction from other humans. Thus, much of his behavior, such as walking on four limbs and speaking like an ape, was learned from the gorillas. And of course, there are things like languages that are not inherited but learned. Say your parents are American. You would not be born knowing English automatically. But if you were raised by, say, French parents, your mother tongue would be French. Which is why it's ridiculous Tarzan would know how to read without someone teaching him and having no concept of the language. I mean, how do you guess that the letter A is A without being told beforehand? I mean, it just looks like a bunch of squiggly lines. Of course, also begs the question of why Tarzan in Disney has an American accent when the people who taught him English were British. It's not how accents work. Accents are also not inherited, but learned. I knew an Australian girl who sounded American because she went to school with kids with mostly American accents. However, we cannot ignore that biologically Tarzan is still human, and there are some things that are inherent, like the human ability to use tools and human attraction in whatever form. I mean, Tarzan would not have been attracted to an ape, because naturally we are not attracted to some creatures that are not our species. It might seem cheap for Tarzan to fall in love with the first woman he sees, but granted he's never had anything else to be attracted to all this time, kind of makes sense he'd be curious of these new feelings. But Burroughs writes this attraction as mainly physical, even on Jane's end. I mean, they don't even have a conversation because Tarzan cannot speak yet. While Disney implements more of an intellectual and emotional connection between them. So, in nature versus nurture, it seems Burroughs favors the nature side, not completely ignoring nurture, but he deems it fit that Tarzan should return to the human world, as because he's human, that's where he belongs. Oh, question from Cosmic Trail. Wasn't Jane the only human female in the group? In the movie, she's the only human female in the group. In the book, she was accompanied by her black maid Esmeralda. And I can kind of understand why Disney cut her out, because she was a very stereotypical black maid. Although, it would have been nice if they had kept a black character into Tarzan, as they are completely left out. And, you can still change how they're presented. Actually, they don't even acknowledge the natives until the Tarzan series. And, well, I cannot confirm that they were presented accurately. They surely weren't cannibals, and I'm not sure which tribe they were supposed to be. But I can tell you, it's still way better than Burroughs' representation of black natives. Okay, in Disney, however, in terms of nature versus nurture, decides that the gorillas are Tarzan's true family, and he belongs in the jungle, favoring the nurture part of the debate. Even after exploring his heritage, the jungle's his home, and he's even willing to let Jane go, let her choose her own life. Jane, in contrast, goes through the internal battle of living the polished, civilized life which she has been nurtured in, and her own natural instincts. So, sometimes natural instinct wins and people feel like trying something new, and although different, Jane's wild life in the jungle turns out to be happier and much more fun than her life in England. And that's something most couples have to deal with, especially if they come from different cultures or lifestyles. You learn about each other's worlds and you figure out how to bring those two worlds together. As the Phil Collins song says, 2 worlds, 1 family. Disney later adapted Tarzan into a musical, which didn't do very well on Broadway but was fairly popular overseas. I had the pleasure to see it in German in Hamburg. Some changes were made, like Tantor the elephant wasn't included. I imagine an elephant would kind of be hard to put on stage. And Turk was made into a male. Before my fellow feminists harp on this, Turk was a male in the book, or at least their namesake was male, so yeah. And Clayton is younger and he pursued Jane romantically like in the book, but he was as jerky as he was in the movie. It also showed more of Kala and Kerchak's marital conflict, which I could only infer from the acting as my German is pretty subpar. But I got the general idea that they, even after their falling out once she adopted Tarzan, they still cared about each other. But, we're kind of afraid to say it. Plus, really cool harness moves with everybody swinging from the ceiling. That was really fun to watch. So, overall, Disney did Tarzan better than the original author did. Family is not dependent on biology, and if you want to change your life and throw all societal preconceptions out the window to be your best self, do it. You do you, and don't let anyone else stop you. Is it just me, or does that sound kind of gay? No wonder I like this movie. Speaking of which, don't forget to check out my Pride merch for sale on Redbubble. Alright, and does anyone in the chat have anything else to add to the conversation, or any questions they have? I know I went on for a long time there, but hey, I had to cover a book and a movie in this one. Oh yeah, and BellaPinkSavage says, not to mention, the music goes hard. Yes, the music from Tarzan is amazing. And it was really interesting listening to those songs in German when I watched Tarzan the musical in Hamburg. If I could only remember how it goes. Anyway, next time, as Father's Day is approaching, we will explore another adoptive relationship between a villain and 3 adorable little orphan girls in the animated film from Illumination, Despicable Me. Only 3 more episodes to go. Okay, until next time. And even when this podcast concludes, you'll all still be in my heart. Farewell.